Millennials are the greatest generation
That's a little biased.
of all time. Done. Episode done. That's all you needed to hear.
To everybody else, millennials are self-entitled, narcissistic, lazy, complainers, overly sensitive. So let's talk about it. Welcome to the NOIRPOISED podcast, where wisdom is power is more than just a motto.
It's our way of life. I said this off camera, but I want to go on record as saying millennials are the greatest generation
That's a little biased.
of all time. Done. Episode done. That's all you needed to hear.
I think that's a little biased, being that you're considered a millennial.
Yeah. It is biased, but even if I was to step out of the millennial age group, I think I look at millennials like, y'all did y'all thing.
You say that because that's your experience, so you're always going to see that. According to everybody else, millennials are self-entitled, narcissistic, lazy, complainers, overly sensitive. These are the things the other generations are calling us. So let's talk about it.
Well, we as in millennials had a debate one time at work at one of my old jobs. There was a big age gap. There was millennials, and then there were, I don't know if they're boomers.
I think it's boomers because before us is considered Generation X.
Yeah. So I think it was a generation before them. The ones that grew up and went to California smoking weed and all that stuff and wanna look down on us, right?
Yeah.
But
we're the problem.
They were looking at us like, I don't understand what's wrong with your generation. You don't work hard, and we let them have it. Like, we were saying, y'all messed up the economy. Y'all did a bad job raising us. I mean, that's not for everybody, of course.
Right.
But
yeah. I've read so many different articles. I've heard so many different like snippets online, like YouTube, where during a particular show, people are complaining about millennials and saying how lazy they think we are. Obviously, the economy's in a bad space right now, right? There are hardly any jobs. And the jobs that there are, they're probably not the best, maybe. And it comes off as if we're not trying, because if we're honest, millennials are also like staying in their parents' home longer than previous generations did. Millennials are marrying later than previous generations, owning homes later, having kids later. Nonetheless, when you look at those things, people make assumptions that we are just selfish. Yeah. We're not trying. We go from job to job every 3 years. They don't get it. But obviously, we're millennials, so we understand the millennial experience. Nonetheless, we are homeowners. We are married with a child and a dog. Yeah. But we know a lot of people where they fall into the brackets of these particular, titles about millennials. So I have my take on it where I don't think it's true.
Don't think as far as the laziness and
I don't think millennials are lazy. I do think there are some of us that are, but I think that's across the board in every generation. Yeah. You're going to have some people who are lazy, and then there's just some people, unfortunately, things weren't laid out the best for them. Yeah. So, I mean, I even try to think of my situation, right? As a New Yorker, growing up the time that I did, I don't know for everybody else, but my experience was I had to work multiple jobs to stay afloat during my college years. So I was always working like 3-4 jobs at one time. Yeah. Like per diem here, full-time, regular, part-time here, babysitting overnight there. You know what I mean? Like just little, whatever you can grab, you took. I was braiding hair, but that was literally just to stay afloat. Nonetheless, I was at my mom's house, so I didn't have a mortgage or anything. But I always think of those moments and try to think of the millennials that are out of space now where they still have to do that to stay afloat. Yeah. It's not that they're lazy. It's just New York life is expensive. Yeah. Life is expensive in general in America now. But New York life particularly is super expensive. Even if you wanted to leave your parents' home and pay rent is practically a mortgage at this point. So it's like, can we blame them? No.
And that's where I have the hard time believing the whole laziness aspect. Because most millennials I know at one point had multiple jobs. Or even if you didn't have multiple jobs, like me growing up, I had multiple internships. None of them were paid. Right. I was in school. I was juggling ministry and doing so much. When I speak to people who are any generation previously, it was a pretty routine, steady life where you graduated high school, you found your job, whether it's a factory or whatever the case is. Very few of them went to college. You got married in your 20s, you bought a home in your 20s, and it was kind of like, yeah, just following that routine.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because we're living through the information age and we just have so much access to information. So it's kind of like
that's part of it.
Analysis paralysis in some extent, but I have a hard time believing that millennials are just simply lazy. I think we have to deal with a lot. And I think we're actually also one of the first generations in a long time to start discovering self.
Yeah.
Where we see, you graduated from high school and then you got into a factory job, or you went to college and you did whatever you have to do. But I'm realizing for the first time in generations that I don't have to do that. Like even the topic of marriage. Have you ever spoken to someone who's like falls into the Gen X age group? I've heard this personally where I asked someone, why did you marry so-and-so? Just like main conversation, like thinking like they're going to say, yeah, we were young and we fell in love. They were like, I was just of age to marry. So
I got married.
I got married.
That was there at the time.
Yeah, and I think
sometimes their story. A lot of generations before us, that is their story.
And I think sometimes the generation before us look at us like that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah,
and we're like, slow down. I don't care what age I am.
Let me find myself first.
Yeah, let me find myself, and then if I find the right person, doesn't matter if I'm in my 20s, 30s, 40s, or whatever. That's when I'll consider marriage. But I'm not going to get married before I feel like it's right. And I think
for the sake of getting married,
right. And I think when they look at that, when they look at people saying, yeah, you know what, I'm not willing to work a job that I'm not passionate about, they look at that as you're lazy. You're lazy because I did that, when that's far from the truth, in my opinion.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that to some extent. I do think there's an aspect of it. There are some of us that are lazy. I think I know a few personally. But I do think for the most part, no, we're definitely not. It's just things don't work out the way we plan for them to work out, right? And that's another conversation, like making plans and doing certain things and then becoming an adult and realizing that, oh, shoot, I might have done everything wrong,
right?
But I don't think it's that we're lazy. Like you said, I do think we're kind of like the in-between generation where we kind of got like some of the foundational things from the previous generations, but we also have a lot of access, like you said, to information. So we're learning more about mental health. We're learning more about like certain things that like were not exposed to the other generation. I think the access actually made us more aware that there's more out there. You don't have to just do this now. You can do more. And you said this many times, but you were like, a lot of older people say that, our generation was the one to create fun. Like there was no fun before. Like fun, what is that? And it's funny because we'll ask our parents like, now that your kids are older, like what do you want to do for you? And they literally cannot answer us.
Yeah.
I think generations before us, like you said, with the whole marriage and have children thing, it wasn't like based off of feeling. It was more so like, this is an obligation.
Yeah.
I'm of age to bear children. Therefore, I'm going to find someone to get pregnant and have children. And it doesn't have to be a situation where like they love that person. There's many relationships where they didn't. And that's why where the kids end up growing up and leaving the home, you'll find that they end up divorced or they're divorced within their home.
Yeah.
Like that's a story we hear all too often. And I think it's because of situations like that. They did things out of routine, and due to our excess access to information, we're just like, yeah, I'm learning from your experience not to do that because it didn't work for you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is a great thing. And I think you just literally hit the nail on the head where we've seen, whether it's our parents or anyone above that generation, do to the point where we're like, yeah, I'm not willing to go through
down
that
route.
Yeah. So I think a lot of times it's an extreme. Millennials could be a bit extreme. Like,
for sure. Yeah.
We sometimes see whatever our parents did, we're just going to do the complete opposite. Yeah. Like we go the complete opposite route kind of thing.
And that's actually not a good thing, too, if we're honest. Like, the extremes can sometimes lead you astray.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Like we'll just go the complete opposite route because we're like, I know I've seen how it ended for them and I'm not willing to do that. But at the same time, I also said this off camera, I think millennials, one of the best things or the hardest things that we're combating at this point is the emotional aspect of things, whether social media or just information out there. We're forced to deal with more of our emotional state versus the previous generation.
Yeah.
Like when I used to teach Sunday school, the topic of bullying came up, and I said, bullying has always been a thing.
Yeah.
But growing up, you didn't hear about kids like committing suicide or going on shooting rampages.
Skin, I think
that's what I thought too.
Yeah.
But they explained to me how it's almost unavoidable now. Like our age, because there was a lack of internet, you knew, okay, school ends at 3:00. I'm going home and I have the rest of the day until tomorrow morning to be peaceful. Whereas now they go to school, they go home, they get into text messages, they get into social media things. So it's harder to deal with.
That's actually pretty sad.
It's harder to deal with emotionally. And I think because we're forced to deal with all of that emotional trauma or influence, it makes us appear as if we're too sensitive or weak. Whereas, you're kind of just opening up a box and, stuff comes up and you're trying to sort the box, organize it. It's kind of like you ever go through your room and try to, clean up, or you go through your closet and you see a whole bunch of a box full of miscellaneous stuff.
Yeah.
You just have to go through it. You don't know where to put everything. I think that's an analogy for what millennials have to go through. And previous generations look at that like, why are you crying? I don't understand what's wrong with y'all. Y'all always complaining about something. It's like, no, look at this box. We're trying to unpack that kind of thing. So even the idea that millennials are weak or overly sensitive, I don't think it's any of that. Honestly, I think
that's a good point. I honestly never really processed it that deep, to be honest with you. I'm aware that we are a little bit in touch with our emotions, and it kind of makes us a little bit more sensitive. But I'm gonna be completely honest. There are times when I look at my fellow millennials and I'm just like, why can't we figure this out and move on? So I never really processed even the aspect of children having to go home and deal with those things 24/7. If I'm completely honest, I was just like, there's something in the food, man. These kids weak. These parents ain't really toughening their skin up. That's really what I thought. Your
birth certificate says 1990. I think it should have said something like 1952 or something like that.
My whole government information out there. Wow. I don't think so. Because I do think I'm a person who's in touch with their emotions, and I'm always asking questions that have to do with the emotional aspect, because and this, I consider myself an emotional person, but I'm not gonna I do yes, okay. Yes to the things you said, but if we're honest with the whole extreme thing, some of us have taken it too far. You don't think so?
I would have to hear an example.
I honestly think sometimes we create issues by just being too
Do we
sensitive.
Create issues, or do we reveal issues?
Sometimes we reveal them. And sometimes I honestly think we ponder on it so long that it becomes a bigger problem than it really was. Just the thought of how common depression is now. Nonetheless, I do think it's a bigger, and this is, I want to be sensitive to the people who deal with this, because it is a real issue. I do think it has to do with more than just sensitivity. I do think it has to do with,
diet,
medications, a lot more, but I do think it has to do with other things. But I also think sometimes we could ponder on things a little bit too much in the negative way, because I'm all for sitting in your emotions and dealing with things, but at some point you're sitting in it so you can figure out a solution. You're not sitting in it just to sit in it, if that makes sense. But again, I don't want to be insensitive to people, so I think it's 50-50. I do think sometimes, no, not 50-50. I do think there's a small percentage of us that are just extremists, for sure. No offense.
But again, don't you think it's just an example of, because one of the things that I don't want to sound like I'm completely, bashing the older generation, but I think a lot of the points that we were making about the stereotypes on millennials are put by the old generation. So I just want to address them a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm a person that believes you can only put out what's put in you.
Very true.
And sometimes we talk about this all the time, how parents parent a certain way, then expect a completely different outcome.
Right.
growing up, if you're crying, they tell you to stop crying.
Yeah.
They're hitting you and they're telling you to stop crying.
Yeah.
So
and then when you become an adult, it's like, why don't you want to express yourself?
Yeah,
you don't
like
want to talk about what you're feeling.
You're clearly
like,
holding a feeling, but you
Yeah.
can't express it, kind of thing. So even things like that, I'm like, even if some millennials are extremists, I think they want to get out of that. They just don't know how to. And that's why, again, I credit there's so many people in therapy right now.
Yeah, I think that's our generation.
Yeah,
too,
like people are going to therapy.
Therapy was not a thing this much back then. It was like marriage counseling, maybe, but like everyone is in therapy, like just because too.
And
like,
that's another reason why I say millennials are dope, because if you find yourself in a position where you're knowledgeable enough to say, you know what, I think I have some emotional kinks to work out, I'm gonna find help.
Yeah.
The previous generation, they would have just
take it out on their kids.
I was gonna say all that.
I mean, that's what they do.
But like, take it out on their kids, or just keep it in. Go to work. Go to church.
It never stays in.
Yeah, you're right. It comes out.
It comes out
somehow
on their kids or their spouse.
Yeah. And if there was one thing I wish, I would love for the generation above us to know about millennials, is we have good intentions. We have good work ethic. We just need guidance. I think if millennials had more guidance, even the ones that might be a little lazy, they'll be more inclined to do more. But it's just the guidance aspect. I kind of feel like we're parenting ourselves. And I hear a lot of people saying that, not just you're parenting yourself, but if you got kids, you're parenting your kids.
And you're parenting your parents.
And you're parenting your parents oftentimes.
That's real life mid-age.
Like, so we're doing a lot. And listen, I'll be the one to clap, right?
But to play devil's advocate, what if they said like, well, we had to do it too?
No, you didn't.
You don't know that though.
And I'm kidding.
You don't know, because when I ask the older people in my family questions about the previous generations, like my grandparents, grand aunts, whatever, it sounds tougher than they were on us.
Yeah.
So there, at least from the experience that I have in my family, there is progression.
Yeah.
It's not great, but it's still progress. Right. So what if someone older than you responded to that and said, well, we didn't have guidance either. We figured it out. So what's your excuse?
I personally think as time goes on, it gets increasingly difficult. So I would say, yes, of course it was hard for you. Life is hard for everyone. But because of the level of information out there and the level of information we have access to, I think it's naturally more difficult for us. When the next generation comes up, Gen Z, I think it's increasingly difficult for them as well.
Generation Alpha, by the way.
Yeah, Generation Alpha.
I can't even keep up either. I only know because of our daughter. I'm just like, oh, she's in generational Alpha.
Even when you hear the stereotypes of Gen Zs, like Gen Zs are just over it. Like they were born done with life. Growing up, we would be excited to be 18, to be 21, to be adults. Like Gen Z is looking at like, I'm not looking forward to all, and I can't blame them because I'm like,
they're looking at us.
Yeah, times are getting more difficult. A lot. Yeah,
that means we're probably miserable.
Yeah, I would say. I would say that. I don't even know if miserable is the right term, but I think Gen Z like just looks at it and be like, I see y'all dealing with a lot. And I know it's gonna get harder, so I'm not looking forward to that.
Yeah,
to someone like that, or the Generation X or the Boomers, I would agree. Like, yeah, you had it hard, but I think it just increasingly gets harder because you have to deal with more. We have to deal with college. A lot of people didn't go to college back then.
Yeah,
a lot of people didn't have student loan debt. At 22, tens of thousands, sometimes even hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loan debt. Wages not rising as much as, the cost of living. Yeah. There's a lot of things that...
all those things are factual.
Right. They didn't have to go through that we're going through. And it's going to get progressively worse for the next generation. So I wouldn't look at Gen Z, honestly, or Generation Alpha and say, we have it harder than you. I think I'd recognize, even now, I recognize that they have it harder. Like we say it all the time.
Every generation has their own things to deal with.
Right, like we say it all the time. We look at our daughter like, yo, we're concerned about the world that you're going to have to grow up in. Yeah, so...
you don't know genders.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But yeah, it's... Yeah, there's so much out there. That's the point I'm making, and it's just gonna get harder. So someone who would say that to me, I look at them and say, I respect your opinion, but I think it's different and it's harder. That's why y'all keep coming to us for help with everything, because You're living just like we are living, and you can't do it with more wisdom and stuff.
That's a fact, because that's one thing I've noticed with us is like being in your mid-30s, you're taking care of yourself because no one taught you how to be an adult.
Yeah.
We really had to figure it out. I can't speak for everyone. God bless the ones who had parents who taught you. But in our case, I feel like most of us did not learn the basic necessities. You kind of have to figure it out once you're at that bridge, basically. You know how they have that saying. And then you have your parents that you have to parent that we don't talk about because they don't know what they're doing. So they come to you for everything. God bless the ones that have American parents, because having a parent who wasn't born here, you are paying the bills, you are making the appointments, you are communicating on the phone three-way. You like, it's the basic things where you're just like, bro, I really have to spend time to do this. You're downloading apps on phones, like, and that's just the bare minimum.
You have random strangers come up to you, be like, "Could you fix this?"
Yeah, that's a real thing. Where like I'm at the supermarket, and a lot of elderly people will need help with like basic things. They don't know how to use the self-service kind of situation. And these are little things that like we have to do on a regular, not just with strangers, but parenting your parents, and then parenting your child, bro. And sometimes you parenting your siblings too. Some people are parenting their siblings too. So it's like, when you think of all of that, I absolutely understand that it is hard, but I also have the mindset like it's hard for everyone, right? So at some point you have to realize, yes, it's difficult. It's very difficult. But what do I have to do in order to get to where I want to be? You know what I mean? So that's where I'm at with it. It's not that some of us are lazy, at least, but in my mind, I think of lazy because I'm always thinking, well, okay, so this is our generation. These are the things we're tackling. Yes, we have insane student loan debt. If you went to school, and then unfortunately, half of us are not even using the degree that we went to school for. So now you're working a job that doesn't even have anything to do with the paper that's hanging up at your parents' house. You know what I mean? Like, you have to consider those things too, but every generation has their own thing. You know how like there's always like a debate between, you know, things are harder on Black people than it is on our white counterparts, or we have to start like further behind and have to work 10 times harder. I see it that way, where it's like, it's true, but it can't be an excuse forever. So that's where I'm at with this. Like, 100% is true. Yeah, things are super expensive now. Rent is higher. We have to work multiple jobs versus our parents who probably had one 9-to-5 that they stayed at for 30 to 40 years until retirement, and it paid off their entire mortgage, and it helped them take you to Six Flags or just the bare minimum. Like, they did that and they were okay living that way. But the reality is, if I have to work 3 jobs to make things happen for myself, it doesn't have to be forever. But you do that to make it happen.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that's where I'm at with it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because one of the mentalities that I try not to stick to is the "it's not fair" thought. Like, it's fine if you get it, but after a certain point you gotta address it. Okay, it's not fair. What am I gonna do about it?
Right.
To put myself in a position where I'm no longer here, kind of thing. As far as millennials having to be the lawyers, the engineers, the handymen, the accountants, like, we're not just balancing all that, but going back to the mental or emotional aspect of it. I think we're actually one of the first generations to look back at our parents and say, you know, I love you, I appreciate you, I respect what you did. Like, me personally, I look back at what my parents did coming here from Haiti, and I'm like, you guys are the true pioneers for our legacy. You know, you guys are the true pioneers because you traveled to a whole nother country, barely knowing the language, and you managed to somehow make it for yourself. So I applaud that as well. But I think we're the first generation to look at our parents and be able to say, you know what, I love you, but I see where you did wrong, and I'm trying to learn.
Their flaws.
Because even when I speak with my parents, they very rarely tell me something that, first of all, that they did wrong.
No accountability. They do. That generation does not take any accountability for anything.
I had asked my parents, like, what mistakes do you think you made?
I'm laughing because I remember
growing up, and I don't remember what
your dad said. I think I remember.
what
I
was it?
remember those answers very well,
What were
actually.
they?
Your dad said it was the day when your sister was being born and he had to leave you guys at someone's house and you cried for him so much. He
Yeah.
said he regrets leaving you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the only
deep.
era.
That was deep.
Yeah,
See, maybe he was a millennial too, because that's something millennials say, like going to the
You
emotional
mean through your
aspect.
whole childhood? That's the only thing you can think of? That was hilarious to me. I mean, it's sweet though. It shows that like he's somewhat in touch with his emotions, which is rare for men in his generation. So that's good. Yeah.
And what did my mom say? I remember she
How
said
could
something.
you not remember? She first said nothing.
Oh yeah, that's what it was. That's why I'm having a hard time remembering, because it was nothing.
No. She said something afterwards.
What did she say?
She said nothing, and then you was like, "There's nothing you would have changed," and she was like, maybe I wouldn't give you my imunez so much because now I see it as an adult you really hate it.
Oh yeah, see.
And I was like, wow.
But
that's funny.
I think one of the reasons why millennials are different is we're able to unbiasedly see what's right and wrong. Because like their generation I think they're more follow the road, don't veer left or right. It is what it is.
Risks.
Yeah, don't take any risk. Yeah. Because when not just them, but when I've asked them questions about their parents, they may say, my parents were tough, but I see why they did X, Y, and Z. And even if you hear through their stories, like your parent was wrong when they did that, but they won't admit it.
They still have like that concept that like their parents are their idols and heroes. Right. And I think that's the difference with our generation, where we look at our parents sometimes a little bit too left. Yeah. But we look at our parents where we're like, I respect you, I love you, but I don't idolize the way you chose to live, and I don't want to mimic that. Right. I think generations before it was just like, my dad was the man and my mom was the best woman alive. Like they've carried that. Yeah. And I think for us it's different. We're just like, I'm gonna learn through your mistakes versus trying to mimic who you were because of who you are in my life. Right. Yeah. Now, I see that.
If I had to ask you, or let me ask you, what do you think is the legacy of millennials? Because I think all millennials are adults now.
Yeah, I think we're the shifters. I think we're the game changers, to be honest with you. And I see the cons in us, but I can't deny the amazing pros. I think we are because like I said earlier, we're the generation that has taken the foundational values from previous generations. So it kind of keeps morality to some extent. And we're also aware of the upcoming technology era. So I think we are literally the bridge. And I think that's why we still have the work ethic where we're still trying to do things. Nonetheless, it's later than previous generations. But if you ask most millennials, a lot of them still have the life goal of becoming a parent and, owning a home and having a dream house or whatever the case is. We just want to be able to do that and not forget ourselves. I think previous generations lived their life in survival mode and were willing to sacrifice themselves a little too much, versus our generation, we're like, I can do this for my family and my children without sacrificing my purpose and my desires. So I think we are the bridge between the old school mentality era and the new kids that are coming up.
When this episode started, I said that millennials are the greatest generation. And after this conversation, I'm 100% sure millennials are the greatest generation.
Stop it. That's jokes. Yeah. I mean, I can see it. I can see it because, like, as we mentioned before, like, I don't know if we said it on the episode, if it was like before we were talking about it, but we're really finding a way to do the whole 9-to-5 thing, but knowing that like that's not all we need to do. We can become entrepreneurs and chase dreams at the same time. We can eventually own homes, but not do it at the sake of like our finances. You know what I mean? We can take care of ourselves and not just go to the doctor once a year, but we're very aware of like fitness and working out like that. I think that's our generation thing. Previous generations probably just jogged. But we're applying, medical health with our fitness journeys, which I think is great. We're all going to therapy for the most part. I think one of the biggest things that I notice amongst the people that I talk to in my community is we're trying to heal ourselves and prevent passing on some of the traumas to the next generation. So even though we're we're kind of like broken, you know, whatever situations we have gone through. To some extent, I think a lot of us are broken from generational things, but also the life that we have to live in now. Like, it is difficult to get a home. That's just the reality for most people. Making money is more difficult. Like, you can't have a single income in a home anymore. Like, that's just not realistic. So we're doing all of that while trying to be aware through our healing process so we don't kind of repeat the cycle. So we're trying to give the next generation a better experience. And I think that's honestly dope.
That is dope.
That should be the title of the episode. Millennials are dope.
You know, it was crazy. I thought about that too.
Really?
Yeah. Literally.
We'll see if it happens.
Yeah.
There's actually a video I remember seeing that kind of like broke down some of the stats and data of our generation versus previous generations in regards to like the housing market, job availability, the cost of living just across the board. And I think maybe I'll put that here at some point and you guys can watch it, or at least maybe we'll just put like a little like snippet so that way you guys can see the difference between previous generations and our generation, so you don't think it's us.
We're not complaining, you know.
Or making excuses. But so I would say let's keep on that trajectory of healing ourselves and preventing traumas for the next generation. Also a reminder to not make excuses. It's hard on us. No matter how hard it is, there is a way. It's our job to find the way. And we're out. Thank you for spending your time with us. We hope you gained some knowledge today that'll promote poise in your life. We have new episodes uploaded every Thursday right here, same place, same time. Until next time, you can follow us on Instagram at NOIRPOISED Podcast to stay connected. That's NOIRPOISED Podcast. We'd love to hear your feedback.
And remember, your wisdom is power.